What's going on, AP World Historians? This is your friend Osborne. We're not doing the little picture of me in the corner. Hope that's okay at the moment. But we are going to be taking a look at things, and you let me know whether you want that in the corner or not. It's a little easier to do it this way sometimes. But I live to serve, so whatever I can do to help y'all learn this information is what we got going on. When we were looking last time, we were talking a bit about the American and the French Revolution, those Enlightenment-inspired revolutions. Again, the American Revolution is one that is not that social, whereas the French Revolution is very social. What we'll be looking at today, specifically Haiti and the Latin American revolutions, and we'll also talk a little bit more about conservatism versus liberalism and stuff like that, and then also just a little something in there about some art for you as well. So without further ado, let's check it out. When we last left, we were looking here at France. Let's go someplace else in the world, though. Let's see what's going on in the Americas. All right, so Haitian Revolution. This is a big one. The College Board loves talking about this one. It's also very appropriate since February is Black History Month to check out the Haitian Revolution, and we'll probably talk in a lot more detail about it later on. But the history and the background here is that it was originally called the colony of Saint-Domingue as a French colony. It was very, very wealthy at the time. Like the people who lived there, well, I should say the white people who lived there, the French plantation owners were incredibly wealthy. The soil in Haiti was some of the greatest, just black gold. You know, they could grow anything there, it seemed like. However, there are three levels of society here. We have the plantation owners, who are white, largely French, probably almost exclusively French, I would imagine. We also then have a middle group called the gens de couleur. These are people of mixed race. They are going to be partly black, partly white. And then on the bottom, of course, we will have the slaves. So the gens de couleur are in kind of a weird place, right? Like they have white parentage. Some of them were kind of well-off-ish. There weren't that many of them necessarily. I mean, there's plenty more than the plantation owners, but still. So the question really was where do they belong in our society? Like what exactly is that? And so they kind of see themselves in a sense, much like we'll describe the Latin American groups being sort of Creoles. Like they think of themselves as the true people of Haiti, not these plantation owners or whatever. It should be noted that many of these gens de couleur do own slaves themselves, or at least participate in slavery as overseers or things like that. During the French Revolution, the gens de couleur saw this as a chance to take over. Like they're looking at these Enlightenment philosophies and ideas about everyone being, important and equal and all that, and they're like, yeah, exactly, we should do the same thing. Also, the French Revolution is chaotic. The government doesn't have the ability to really oppress, the people here. The plantation owners aren't getting a lot of support from French soldiers and all. So the gens de couleur see it as an opportunity for them to kind of rise up and take over. And so open warfare will result. However, both the gens de couleur and the plantation owners ignore the fact that, oh yeah, we have a whole bunch of people here who are enslaved. And so those slaves see this as a chance to revolt, and that's exactly what they do. The slaves rise up and proceed to act against both the gens de couleur as well as the plantation owners. Now, the person who is going to be one of the most famous leaders of this revolution, Toussaint Louverture, is actually a gens de couleur, which is kind of strange. But he had a lot more education, I think, than a lot of the slaves, obviously, and so therefore, I guess he was more acceptable to the slaves also, but he will end up being the leader of this revolution. So the slaves will basically take over in 1801, and they will issue a constitution declaring equality. Now, once Napoleon is in charge here, he is not a big fan. And the major reason he's not a big fan is because he's if he's not quite the emperor, he's the consul, so he sees that as a challenge to his authority. But also, it makes a lot of money, right? He doesn't want to lose this this nice little jewel of the Caribbean, so he wants something different to happen. He actually invites Louverture to France. He arrests him, and he puts him in prison, which is awful. He will then die in prison. However, there's a lot of other talent there, so we end up having a couple of other people who will take over, such as Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Now, the slaves will keep fighting, and one of the problems for the French is that their troops are going to die to horrible diseases, malaria, yellow fever, stuff like that, which is in Haiti. And so in 1804, independence was declared. But the problem is that this 5-6 years of war is going to really cripple the country. Like a lot of those soils are going to be damaged, from lack of work and all that. And there'll be a lot of destruction and stuff to other kind of buildings and things. So it's a pretty bad situation kind of all around. And that's one of the reasons why Haiti is kind of problematic in the long run. So here we have a image over there on the left. I will show you some of the names there. There's Toussaint Louverture right there in the middle. We also have Dessalines to the top right. These guys love some fun hats, Dessalines and Christophe. So we have a couple of different people in there. And over there on the right then you can see a kind of weird drawing of Toussaint Louverture. This is really what people were most afraid of by the Haitian Revolution, was the massacre of whites by slaves. I mean, again, this did happen. I mean, you know, they were slaves. They were treated horribly by their masters. So when it was time to rise up and you know, take over, they oftentimes would end up killing a lot of whites or plantation owners. Again, like, you know, I don't like anybody dying, but you can understand, you know, like the situation here. But the thing about it is that while that did happen, it didn't always happen, or, you know, it wasn't quite as brutal maybe as these pictures are depicting, but these are the kind of things that come out of Haiti. Like, people draw pictures, they tell these stories of these horrifying, you know, murders by slaves. And so the thing about it is it terrifies white slave owners across the world. Like, OMG, like, what are we going to do about this? This is horrifying. Like, people, you know, white people were killed. Like, that's a problem. So that is one of the things that we'll see really makes a lot of people afraid. It's why Haiti basically is a international pariah for a long time. Nobody wants to deal with them because they are a slave country and they're worried it will inspire the slaves. So, like, America, for example, does not really deal with them for that same reason. That will also end up hurting them in the long run. All right, let's talk a little bit more about some Creole revolutions in Latin America. We talked before about the Creoles, if you remember. We talked before about the different castas system. So we have the Peninsulares and the Creoles, who are at the top of the Latin American hierarchy. Peninsulares are those born in Spain. Creoles are a people of Spanish descent who are born in the Americas. And they don't like each other very much, right? So a lot of these Creoles are very well read in the Enlightenment, and there's more of them than the Peninsulares, a lot more. And they were very interested in political independence, but not social reform. Again, this is very similar to America. These Creoles basically want to get rid of the Peninsulares, they want to get independence from Spain, and then they want to run things on their own. Now, one thing about this, though, is that these places are pretty, like, large. Like, there's a lot of different ones. So these revolutions do not happen all at once. There's no, you know, Latin America, United States of Latin America, or anything like that. So they take from 1810 to about 1825. A whole bunch of different ones are going to take place for these revolutions. So, you know, certain areas like Mexico or Spanish South America or whatever, like, these places are going to revolt at different times. The big precipitating event here that is going to start this, though, was Napoleon invading Spain and Portugal in 1807. Napoleon starts every problem, right? So when he invades Spain and Portugal in 1807, he puts his brother on the throne of Spain and, like, takes over control of Portugal, right? So technically then he is in control of a lot of these local areas, but local groups called juntas are going to oppose his rule. They don't like him being in charge. And, you know, like, previously the Creoles weren't big fans of the Peninsulares, but now it's like these Peninsulares are working for Napoleon, not Spain. So why should we work for them? And so we end up seeing a whole bunch of these revolutions. Initially, these juntas are just sort of like, well, we'll be independent until a proper king is in charge in Spain. But then after a while, they're like, well, we'll just do it on our own. So basically, two areas of revolt in Spanish South America. Okay, so this is kind of confusing, but we're going to see Simón Bolívar in the north of South America and José de San Martín in the south of South America. So these two guys are basically going to start on two different parts of the continent, and they will sort of literally work their way up towards each other. So Simón Bolívar is near Caracas. He will win a series of victories against Spanish forces. One of his biggest things is that he is going to hold his followers together. It's a very difficult thing to do. However, once he leaves, this country that he creates called Gran Colombia will fall apart over time. So that is him over there on the right. He is extremely famous in Latin America. People love him there. Like, I think, what is it, Bolivia is named after him. There's a bunch of, like, Venezuela's currency is called the Bolivar. Like, you know, he has a lot of influence in that world. You can see on the left there some maps about when places are getting independence. So you can see pretty much 1810 to 1820 is the big spot there. So up there in the north, that's sort of, what is that, like teal or something? That is the place where, that's Gran Colombia. And then the south is going to be San Martin at the bottom part. We'll also see a couple others there. But, I mean, even in the 1980s, places are still getting control. And then some of them, like Suriname, for example, are not independent today. All right, to the south, San Martin and Buenos Aires will organize the south and push out the Spanish, but his region will also fragment into mainly around Chile and Argentina, which were never big fans of each other. Brazil, on the other hand, will follow a different path, which is kind of strange. So they have an enormous number of slaves, but they hate Portuguese control, but they're really afraid of slave uprisings. So they are largely going to stay loyal in this period because of that. But when Napoleon invades, the Portuguese royal family will flee to Brazil. And so essentially King Pedro, like the royal family will be there. They will move back after all this, and their son will stay and declare himself King Pedro I, and he will declare himself independent in 1822. And they will end up having an elected parliament and freedoms. This is kind of like very similar to America, except they end up having a king. Now, landowners initially love this. They think it's a fantastic idea, but Pedro's like, you know what, guys, we should get rid of slavery. And they're like, yeah, forget that guy. So they kick him out. The monarchy is overthrown, and they are a republic in 1889. But shortly after that, they will end up having to ban slavery because the rest of the world basically has, and they're like the last one. Okay, let's take a look at our Mexican Revolution then. Mexican history is really fascinating, but it's also kind of complicated. Like, there's lots of people and names and things going back and forth. So we're going to do our best to kind of work our way through this. But the Mexican Revolution of 1810. By the way, there's a bunch of Mexican revolutions. So this is the one of 1810. There's a guy named Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla. He called upon people to rise against Spanish officials. This is called the Cry of Dolores because he does it in the town of Dolores. Specifically, he's calling up the Amerindians. Those are most of his parishioners, and they are going to oppose the Creoles. But the Creoles are not happy with Costilla. They're like, look, we want to revolt, but not with all these non-Creoles in charge. So they arrest him and end up killing him. The Creoles, however, will still support the Spanish government for the short term. But events in Spain will change these things. So we're going to have a new guy who's in charge named Agustin de Iturbide. He will basically strike a deal with the peasants and declare independence in 1821. Hilariously, he declares himself Emperor of Mexico, and then he is overthrown and executed by the new people who are in charge. So again, very kind of strange and complicated. All right, just real quick, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about some other kind of revolutions in this period, which would be a little bit of an art revolution in this time. So late 19th century or kind of early 19th century, we're going to have a movement called Romanticism. This used to be in the curriculum. I don't know that it is so much anymore, but I just find it interesting. So this is an artistic movement that focuses on nature, emotion, and the exotic. It goes along really well with the Enlightenment because of all these new ideas and things like that. So the idea of nature and emotion is something interesting. Probably the most famous one is this one here, Caspar David Friedrich, Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog in 1818. So it's supposed to be very emotional in its form. We can also see another great one here. I love this painting. It's Theodore Géricault, The Raft of the Medusa in 1819. It is based upon a true story of a ship called the Medusa that wrecked, and they have this raft, and people basically like start eating each other and stuff. So it's very, very emotional, very like strange. But Romanticism is an art movement in this period that's sort of inspired by the Enlightenment as well. All right, let's finish this up here with a little bit of nationalism and unification in Europe. Primarily, this is related to Italy and Germany. So we know of these as states today, but of course, at one point, they were not. So what's going to happen then is this guy, Count Camillo de Cavour, who is an Italian liberal supporter in the Italian state of Piedmont. He will form an alliance with the French and help to push out Austrian control. Later on, a southern leader named Giuseppe Garibaldi will help to unite the country under a king of Piedmont, and this will unite the whole country in 1861. And we will have our modern-day country of Italy, mostly. There's like a little tiny bit that's not part of it yet, but they will form underneath this Piedmontese king and become the modern-day country we know today. On the other hand, Germany forms around the same time through the country of Prussia, which is a major German power. They have a prime minister named Otto von Bismarck, which he does very similar things to Cavour in Germany that he does in Italy. So he will expand Prussian power through some small wars. Finally then, in 1871, they will go to war with the French, and when he does so, they will unite liberals and conservatives together and declare themselves a new country in 1871 of Germany. Now, it's a different Germany because, of course, after World War I and World War II, they shrink it a bit, but the core of Germany is still there. That is Cavour over there on the left. He's got quite the neck beard going there. And pointy helm guy there is going to be Otto von Bismarck. All right, just real quick, a couple of other random kind of things. We're not going to go into much detail for these, but we do have a couple of different revolutions also continuing on here. So, for example, Greek Rebellion 1821. This is to do with a lot of these Balkan revolts. A lot of different people are revolting against the Ottomans because they're unhappy with being under Ottoman control. There will be another French Revolution in 1830. They'll replace the Bourbon kings with the Orleans kings because they're unhappy with that. So that's something that takes place. There's also a Belgian Revolution of 1830 where they gain independence from the Dutch. There's a Spanish Caribbean in 1860s. We see Cuba and Puerto Rico are starting to become independent. The Puerto Rican national song is written at this time, La Boricua, which is a cool one. And then the propaganda movement of 1890s is going to push for more independence in the Philippines. So what this is all basically showing you is that revolutions, ideas, new concepts, Enlightenment-based influences are blowing up all over the place, ladies and gentlemen. So we're seeing them in a ton of different locations. So anyway, that is going to end it up there for us with a couple of different other revolutions. Remember, these political revolutions are happening all over the place in lots of different areas, and they will have a big influence and a big push when we go through the next couple of sections here. Hopefully you learned a little bit here today. I know I'm kind of moving kind of quick through these, but hopefully you were able to get the kind of basics that you needed to understand them, okay? Hope you all are doing well out there, and thanks for listening.